being back. So now we move on to our second session this morning, and hopefully everybody enjoyed the coffee, tea, and posters. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you our second keynote speaker, Maria Luciana Axente, CEO of Responsible Intelligence, who will be giving the topic about beyond single-track thinking, governing the ethical complexity of multimodal AI.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Hope you enjoy your coffee. When I was invited to give this presentation, I was actually thinking, how should I approach it? What should I tell you? I mean, you guys are looking at multimodal from inside out, but perhaps I could give you a bit of a challenge and show you how is it to think about it from outside in. And before I start, just a bit of a disclaimer. This title is ChatGPT generated. And then I was actually thinking, should I change it? Because it's too many words, it's too complex, and it scratches my brain. But then I said, it's actually very good because it exemplifies the complexity of the topic you guys are researching. And for us looking from outside in, it's a good indication that it's not as easy as it looked like. I'm sure that when you're working on something for a long time, you say, oh, this is piece of cake, it's so easy. It's actually not. And it happened to me working in AI for the last decade, realizing that there's so much complexity we're talking about, but when we present it to the outside world, we need to be able to do it in a simple way. A little bit of a introduction of myself, so to get a good understanding where I'm coming from with the story I will lay out to you today. I spent the last 10 years looking at responsible AI. I am not a technologist, although I have a bit of a technical background. I'm a business person at heart, and I ended up working in a consulting for 10 years. I left about a few months ago to be able to explore further how can AI benefit the wider public without having the constraints of a corporation. So, in other words, I can speak more freely than I used to be in the last 10 years. And part of my exercise is to explore really what does it mean to use AI and how can we govern it and understand it to the extent of understanding its nature, and by understanding its nature, being able to work with it. And again, from an engineer perspective, all things are fine and clear. When you put it in an outside world that's really messy, really complex, really unpredictable, because we are unpredictable, and it's our world, that things change a little bit. So I was thinking that perhaps today I would try to give you some food for thought, perhaps challenge. That when next time we're focusing on your research agenda, think about what would your grandma think about your research. Challenge that. Or another challenge is if your work would made it on Daily Mail front page, what would the headline be? I think those thought experiments are very helpful for you to understand, on one hand, how important the nature of your work is that has real life consequences. And secondly, being able to think about those issues beforehand, not an afterthought. A lot of technology we are using today, the big glitzy tech that Silicon Valley has gave us, has given zero thought on what will be the impact. That is the reality. Let's not fool ourselves. Even the latest, I would say, tragic death of few teens that committed suicide at the advice of ChatGPT, and the reaction of OpenAI just shows how they will put any technology out there, they will allow it to be tested and used, and they'll just deal with the consequences as emerge. But I think we cannot afford to do that, especially with something as complex as multimodal AI. And yes, I will, again, preach into the choir. Bear with me. I'm still learning what multimodal AI really is. And I think to a certain extent, I don't need to go that deep into it just yet. I think for the purpose of what I'm trying to convey as a message to you, it's more of what are the key characteristics and why multimodal is different from all the other types of AI we've seen so far. And why do we do this? Because in doing so, then we can iterate is it that different, then how can I work with it? How can I govern it in a way that keeps track of those particularities? So the way I see multimodal AI, it's actually not at all an incremental upgrade. It's a fundamental change in how we think about AI. And this fundamental change is that this layering of different capabilities starts bringing the technology we call artificial AI a step closer, quite close to human-like capability. And then for the better or for worse, I mean, that triggers a host of opportunities and benefits, and you guys will discuss about it. But please keep in mind the risk. And this is where, again, from the previous iterations of AI, there is a little thinking about the actual risk and the nature and when they emerge. And although we've done tremendous progress in understanding of risk, unfortunately, we've seen a series of bad AI cases that further validate how real and present those risks are. We will benefit tremendously from people working from inside out to recognize the risk and being able to brainstorm a little bit about the nature of those risks. Probably, if again, from my perspective, being a newbie into the domain, looking at multimodal, I think it's, first of all, it's that fundamental shift in risk. And again, we cannot afford, to run away, as we have done it in the last 20 years, without considering the risks. And at some point, there will be, unfortunately, some misuses of AI that will trigger some sort of a liability issue that will point the fingers to the engineer. Already has happened in the US. There was a precedent that has been established when a autonomous car has killed a passenger, and the judge decided that the main responsible is the engineer. How many engineers in the room? Will you be comfortable for the system you put forward to be held responsible, solely responsible for the system you created? I don't think so, especially when you're talking about high-risk application. So this understanding how the risk propagates as long as with the benefit is absolutely important. And of course, the governance gap, I mean, we discussed just before the talk, is the fact that we are still attempting to govern AI, the general AI, Gen AI, narrow AI, general purpose AI, as you want to use the term. We still attempt to govern it in a linear thinking. And with this linear thinking, we're not going to go very far. And especially for you guys working in a domain as complex as a layer, when you have different type of data integrating, you have this complex model learning, and this emergent behavior, we need to challenge ourselves to be able to say, we need to be thinking how to control those models from the outset and now, and we are the best place, because guess what? We are building it, so we know better than anyone external, those who are coming from outside in, what needs to be done to be able to keep track of those models. Perhaps is the best example where we can look at on one of the risks, and I'm not going to spend too much time because I'm going to give you some pointers on the ethical dilemma, is the issue of bias. In fact, some of the most notorious misuses of AI have ended up discriminating people to the extent that is unbelievable. From the ProPublica, which I'm sure you have heard of in US, that has discriminated defendants of color, to the benefit scandal in the Netherlands, or the A-level results here, we have seen a more basic version of technology harming people in real life. And we cannot have that going forward, especially when you deploy this level of complex technology. I think in understanding, the reason we need to understand why technology is different is because at some point we will use it and we will be at a crossroads, or we will be in a little bit of an unknown territory, uncharted waters about, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And that's why the ethical dilemma or thinking about potential ethical dilemmas on multimodal AI becomes very important. Because on top of understanding the key capabilities, why is it different than previous iteration of AI, the key question is like, but if we are to deploy it in a use case, will it be a good thing or a bad thing? It's very simplistic. And I think having this approach will allow you to be a bit more precise rather than being captured in the complex world of philosophical and ethical debate. As a real world practitioner, I could label myself as an industry ethicist. The question is it right or is it wrong? And how do I justify my choices? And if I ask this question, is it a who benefits and who loses? I think those are fundamental, simple questions. If you ask them from the beginning, you have a better chance to be able to address the issues. So I propose you some ethical dilemmas that are not new. In any case, we knew about them because we've seen them in action before. But imagine those issues multiplying by 7 degrees of magnitude. And then, you know, the issues of bias. When you have a biased data collection and before you even think about the data sets, that will propagate across the value chain of your AI solution. And then by the time you put it together and you present it, wrap it into a product, and this discrimination happens, it will be very difficult to go back and trace it. And that leads me to the second challenge or ethical dilemma is opacity. Opacity or explainability or lack of transparency has been known to haunt the engineers for a long time. I think the big question we saw about 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago when I worked with the first clients were, but how do I know why the model came up with this conclusion? And the engineers are like, I don't know. That's not a good enough answer when you're talking about a critical system deployed in health, in education, in benefits allocation. But this opacity crisis, I would call it, it's not just about the ability to understand the inner works of the machine. I think we are a bit more comfortable, maybe not, maybe yes, with the fact that we might not be able to explain precisely how those models work and why they make a decision over the other. But the opacity crisis, I think it's even more profound, is when we are not able to see the full complex ecosystem where AI technology operates. Gone are the days when you as a builder of a technology, you build the whole stack. Now we work in an ecosystem. We buy services from one provider and the others. And in the end, when you are the client or the customer of an AI application, you might not see the full picture of how many different parties are part of your solution. And that lack of complexity generates lack of transparency generates another big problem. It's like, how do I manage if something goes wrong? How do I know how to address and stop the problem? I think this lack of transparency in the supply chain puts the regulators in a little bit of a difficulty, whether they know it or not. Another big one, obviously, the privacy invasion. Unfortunately, one of the trade-offs of the benefits AI will bring is a complete overhaul of privacy as we know it. Will we see less crimes or less unfortunate events that will happen to us as individuals, as a collective? Yes, we do. But in the same time, we will be monitored 24/7 at the level of the cell in our body. And that's a very uncomfortable truth we need to acknowledge before we go any further. And multimodal AI is going to take the privacy erosion to the next step. We are not ready for this level of privacy intrusion in, I would say, forever. Because the conversation around privacy focuses so much on like, let's make sure that the data we have is protected. That's why we have a GDPR in Europe and a data bill in the UK. But if you look outside our shores, it's a very different story. But the conversation about privacy shouldn't only be about how to protect our data, but is the data I collect and process at this level, is it right what we're doing? And how do we make sure that we provide and we continue to uphold the fundamental human right of privacy to heart and give people the options to opt out? And I think if I were to point one of the biggest challenges we will have, you guys will have with the multimodal AI, it's going to be privacy erosion. And the fact that the way the data is being layered can identify a user with such a fine level of details, it will add even more information about us. We might not be ready, or we are not even we are not even aware that this information exists. And another big one, it's the use of multimodal application in deepfake and deception. And about a year ago, I did a piece of research with Bank of England and financial services, and we investigated, we've interviewed a number of large UK banks to understand how are they protecting themselves around scams, financial scams, and what's the state of affair. If they're using AI, of course, the bad actors are using AI, and it felt a little bit as a catch-22, meaning that they're using AI, but the bad actors are even more creatively using AI and scamming people. So what they were saying then is, irrespective of how many intervention and protection we are applying, we need to be able to educate the wider public of what it happens. I think you've all seen that there were some global cases of deep fakes, Taylor Swift, and few politicians in the US, that actually prompted the conversation that we need to understand much more about deep fakes. As the multimodal AI technology matures, we will see such accurate deep fakes. It will be so difficult to tell what's real and not. And I think, again, similar to with privacy, are we ready to live in a society where truth is derived from big data and it can be manipulated so easily? And again, like when you're building those tools and you proceed with your work, think that out there is your grandma and your uncle who might be, scammed by a perfect deep fake of yourselves asking for money. And what would you want to do about it? And I think because you work in this domain, I think it's important for you to keep those questions in the back of my mind. And the last one, I wouldn't be able to tell you which one is my favorite. I would think they were important, but I think the ones that I'm scared the most is over-reliance. And the fact that gradually, without even realizing, we ended up delegating so much agency to technology that we didn't even realize. And perhaps the best example is using navigation. So how many of you here are drivers? Quite a few. So when you drive around, do you go anywhere without Google Maps or Waze, or you rely on yourself to drive? Okay, it's a good start. Hang in there. I am not. I'm like, at some point, I drive in London and my phone battery went dead, and I freaked out because I didn't recognize the streets. And it's like, what I'm going to do? I had to stop to plug my phone and wait for it to charge for me to continue my journey. And I said, like, this is unbelievable. I mean, because I was so mindlessly driving and using the algorithm, I didn't realize I lost the ability to find my way in my own city. And this is just a small indication how much I rely on Waze to find my way in my own town. And if that's the case, what are other parts of my life where I've delegated my skills to AI? And I think, again, it's very tempting because it can do so much and it will do much more for us to be continuously thinking, oh, this is too boring. I'm just going to give it to AI to do it. I'm just going to give it to ChatGPT to write my essay. I know many pupils and students are thinking about that, without realizing that what we're losing, it's our own abilities, and there's no way back because we know how hard it is to build abilities. So thinking about those ethical dilemma is requires us not only to recognize them in isolation, but requires us to recognize that what is needed, it's this systemic rethinking. And I wouldn't say this out loud if I wouldn't have seen how current governance regimes in banks, in retails, in public sectors are being designed and proposed. Everything is linear, everything is not connected because we are not trained to think in systems. But guess what? The domain of your work is actually pushing you, willing or not, to think systemically, because multimodal AI, being a convergence of different types of data, it already sets the precedence that this is a system, and we need to be thinking about how we control it with the same mindset. Very quickly, give you a bit of a flavor on what happens when it comes to governance. Obviously, you are aware, because it was a lot in the news, we have now in Europe a new AI Act. Fortunately, unfortunately, after years and years of drafting it and consultation with thousands of experts, here comes a new administration in Washington that decides that perhaps regulation is not the best way forward. So let's kind of try to put on hold every regulatory proposals and kind of send the signals around the world that, yeah, regulation is not that needed because we need progress. We need AI to work. Yes, we need AI to work, but it needs to work in a way that is guarded. You don't put a car on the road without proper testing. You don't, slash a plane in the sky without, taking it through a host of procedures for safety. Why would it do it with AI? I mean, it's counterintuitively. Of course, we have principles, we have all sorts of standards, but unfortunately, there's the way the governance has been designed is very static and very linear. And it creates a lot of challenges for those wishing to implement it. Probably the biggest one is like the evolution, the fact that technology evolves so fast, and what was designed 5 years ago as the AI Act might not be necessarily fit for purpose. And the fact that we have to think, you build a solution, an AI application, which will be deployed globally. But guess what? The regulatory frameworks are very much bound by a jurisdiction. How do you make sure that you integrate that at the global level? Again, thinking about the governance gaps and why they are not working, and it's not going to work in the case of multimodal AI. It's this modality interdependence, is the fact that regulators have not foreseen the emergence of other types of technology. To be frank, very few of them actually have foreseen the emergence of Gen AI. And it was caught by surprise. AI Act would have been released earlier, but they had to put a hold. Thankfully, November 2022 happened, and then at least they added a chapter on general purpose AI. So to a certain extent, it's a little bit covered. But for the work you're doing, there's very little coverage. And with that, the regulators, who many are looking up to as the main defenders of the risky applications of AI, are not at all prepared for various reasons. The fact that they're underfunded, the fact that the experts working in this field are being drawn to the highest salaries in the tech industry, and that gives them actually limited intervention, not just to deploy those frameworks, but also to be able to enforce it. And the fact that, again, technology evolves, and the behaviors of the systems evolves, and there's no way to capture it and then feed it back to those who were supposed to regulate it. So it's time for us to be thinking on upgrading the tools and being able to think that we need to turn the old way of thinking into something new. And of course, there are some promising industry practices. You, of course, might be aware of them. I know that the Microsoft usage policy and the ban against facial recognition in law enforcement came very much as a backlash. And now that I'm a little bit outside of the large organization, I can say without lying, I don't trust it. Yes, they're useful, but how can we trust them that they are doing the right thing? How can we trust them that this is not just lip service? So I think, again, thinking about those issues, because many of them, they're afterthoughts. You know, OpenAI, you know, by now they are famous of just dropping something out there and see what happens and then react to it rather than do it proactively. There are other practices that could be leveraged and applied for the multimodals, the red teaming that has got so much traction, and bias audits. And of course, you know, there's the emerging use of sandboxes, regulatory sandboxes, that gives us hope. There is some sort of a innovation when it comes to governance. In order for us to go to the next level, I'm suggesting you guys are thinking of 3 principles from multimodal governance to address its ethical dilemmas and its complexity. First of all, system thinking is my favorite. We need to be able to think in systems, and we need to be able to communicate in systems. I know it's hard. Education system doesn't teach us, but we have to. Multimodal is pushing you to do that, is pushing us to do that. Adaptability, of course, we need to be able to design concepts that are suited not just for the current evolution of technology, but will happen in 5 and 10 years' time. So being able to capture the essence, I think it's fundamental. And lastly, it's proportionality. I mean, you can't apply the same level of scrutiny to a soap dispenser versus a medical diagnostic in oncology. So we need to be able to recognize that not all applications are equal among themselves. And that's why I'm bringing to you a new concept. New concept because working in responsible technology, I do like to slap responsible on everything I do so that it's there and people remember it. So it started with responsible AI, and then I've used the same framework and adapted to data, so responsible data, and then responsible metaverse, responsible immersive words, just to make sure that we understand we need to change our mindset when it comes to technology. It was too much running away, breaking things, and having no consequences attached to our actions. Now we have to start pausing and thinking about this. That's why that responsible label is so important. And I haven't put too much thought into the responsible model intelligence too much. Perhaps this is something that we could do together, or you could take it, and you don't even have to call it responsible model intelligence. But it's a concept that allows us to kind of ground our thinking into something that's tangible and is cohesive. With the previous evolution of responsible AI, when we started framing a language and a philosophy other than the toolkit that we created as a consultancy, people started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, because sometimes just speaking in processes and technical terms is intimidating. But when you have a language that is approachable and it kind of translates complexity into something that everyone understands, you start seeing the light. Too many times, responsible technology has been seen as a constraint, and I think that is fair to say that in the research community, in the startup communities, thinking responsibly, it's still being rejected, without considering that, in fact, thinking responsibly is growing sustainably, meaning that you're not only avoiding possible consequences, you build with people in mind, and people recognize that. I mean, survey after survey public opinion or public attitude survey after one after another, people recognize and demand for ethical, responsible technology. We are looking at the new generation, especially your generation and younger, that are seeing technology with different lenses, and they will grow to be the consumers of tomorrow. So it becomes a non-negotiable for those this philosophy to be the cornerstone of building and using technology. This is perhaps this slide is actually not for you. If you decide to become a founder, please keep this in mind and use it, because responsible multimodal intelligence, responsible intelligence is a competitive advantage. So keep that in mind, and don't forget me if you become a billionaire. And because we're not there yet to discuss about frameworks or rules, golden rules, I thought it's better to suggest tenets of responsible multimodal intelligence. Why they are suggested tenets and not just golden rules? Because we need to define the term first, and tenets describes much better the grounding the truth and validating, then giving the golden rules that are more action orientated. We're not there yet to go into action, but we still have to spend some time to think about it. Some of them, they are intuitively, and you say, oh, it's common sense, Maria, you've seen this before. Yes, but we need a bit of reminder. And I think this is one of my favorite, because one of the benefits of EU AI Act, it says not all the applications are equal, and you need to be able to recognize the level of the risk it brings every single time. So we need to be thinking about the risk up front. We need to recognize its probability and an impact, and with that, we'll have that proportionality we need. Obviously, agile and adaptive. When you are doing research or you operate in a company, small company, it's very easy to be agile. But when you are working in a complex, large organization, agility is not a word they actually live up to. It's a word they abuse. They aspire to be agile, they aspire to be adaptive, but they can't. So keep in mind that we need to be able to find that agility somehow, and this is when, again, creativity is needed. This is a hard one. It's hard because bringing together different stakeholders is a difficult task. People speak different languages. Although they speak English, it feels like some speak Klingonians, others speak I don't remember any other species in the Star Trek, but you get the point. Everyone speaks different language, and they don't actually like to be brought together. So one of the big challenges we had in the whole AI ethics and responsible AI community is to say it out loud. Let's come together. Let's learn a language we all understand, because otherwise we won't be able to see all the facets of AI in practice. So we need to be able to not only bring people together, but also to empower them to speak a common language. And there are examples. There are, for example, partnership in AI is a good one. Yes, you might argue that it's being funded and supported by the tech industry. Well, we can't go ahead without them, so we need them. So we need to be able to work with them and challenge them to the core. But also we need academia to be present, and academia needs to learn the language of practicality. And that was one of the reasons I ended up parachuting myself at Cambridge and doing a bit of research, is because every single person I've at Cambridge were very curious about how does it work in practice? What can you tell us about the real life? Because we have all those ideas, abstract ideas, but we don't really know if our ideas will turn out to be what is really needed. Can you give us that feedback? Although, you know, what we were relaying was way less interesting and quite boring, but is it what's actually needed at the time? We are so desperate for accountability mechanisms for the reason I said before, where you are an engineer and someone decides that you are the sole responsible for a massive disaster. That's not fair, because you've acted in an accountability structure. You have bosses that told you to do so. So I think we need to continue to to challenge and demand for code of conducts, obviously start the discipline of recording so that we are ready for auditing and assurance. But I think this is where we are still a long way off. Multi-layered approach. Okay, this is linked to the nature of multimodal AI. You know much more about it than me. Anticipating the risk. I think I mentioned this earlier. We need to be able to think at all time, especially when we build new application, what can go wrong, and that will allow us to include some sort of mitigations as we from the design rather than deal with it later. And obviously continuous learning. And I think that's the reason I've accepted this invitation. So thank you very much for having me, because AI continues to surprise me and continues to pull me out of my comfort zone and say like, oh, here is a new concept. You need to learn all about it. Just go and spend like an accelerated MBA, PhD in a week so that you can be able to, you know, understand what's going on. So I think this continuous learning is where we are all in it. Not just you guys are at the cutting edge of research on this technology, but all of us. And I'm sure we can learn from each other, us bringing you what happens in the real world, and you us give us, showing us what's the art of the possible. What I wanted to, the last point I wanted to make is that ahead of us is a phenomenal opportunity. But in order for the benefits to realize, we need to be thinking about the risks. And if we do it early, learn earlier, learning from the mistakes that have been done in the past, we have a much better job to see multimodal thriving as you guys, I hope you wish you do. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria. So now we can take some questions. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maria, for the wonderful insight on the security and risks of AI. My research is all about that. I have a question for you. So, in coming years, how do you see the enforcement of these regulations and compliance of AI, whether it will be coming from government or private enterprises? Like, what's your thought on it?
I think the good news is that they will give a foundation and a little bit of that mind shift. And I think we are so desperate because, unfortunately, the software engineering domain was one of the, probably the only engineering domain that was not attached to any responsibility and accountability. As a software engineer, you look at the data and said, oh, look, so numbers, I could crunch them. But those numbers are about people's life. And it's enough to read the horror stories. And I encourage you to read Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford to see some of the ImageNet and likes databases were created with mugshots of people that are in the worst moment of their lives. But no one, you know, as a engineer, data scientist, you don't really think that you're doing this to people. So I think the first thing is we started seeing a change of that mindset. And the second one with regulation will create a bit of a basis. Yes, the regulators themselves around the world, they need to do a better job in adapting. But at least we had a basis. We had not too much, I would say. Specifically to AI, of course, there are vertical regulation. They're applicable. So for medical devices, you'll go to MHRA. For anything to do with data, ICO in the UK. But I think we're starting from a very solid foundation, and then we'll see how governments and regulators alike will do a better job to keep up with what's going on.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
Hi, thank you again for such a great talk. Firstly, I wanted to ask, like, how do you have any thoughts about like auditing perhaps? You had a slide on like lower tier to higher tier risks. So how do we audit like data that's been used in a lower tier and then applied to a higher tier? So like kind of a derivation of like original data. And then secondly, like you had a great picture of like different stakeholders contributing to like the governance of AI. So I had a question like, how do you think we could directly incorporate like users into like stakeholder voting, and then also like how do we kind of balance the weight that we put on each of these inputs, because obviously every contributor has something different to put into a vote, but then how do we like weigh it so like it's not heavily biased towards any certain sector?
Very good questions. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the question earlier. Very good question as well. First of all, when it comes to audit, you have to be prepared to be audited, and you have to be willing to be audited. So in your case, I think it's easy because you operate within a rather controlled environment. But what we got from our clients, my clients, is like, you're not going to touch my data set, you're not going to touch my model. So until we have someone, a regulator say, you have to do this and you have to do it regularly, it's not going to be a common practice. The government is, continue, UK government, to push the AI assurance agenda, but until there is a line in the sand, people will just say it's a nice to have. So I think before we talk about imposing those rules, we also have to be ready. From my experiences, I've seen clients in financial services that I expected them to have a higher degree of maturity in governing AI, developing or purchasing AI mindlessly. There's no process. There's no data collection. Again, we came such a long way in imposing model and data cards as a way of understanding what's going on. So we can't really talk about audit until we have the information needed to be able to conduct those audits. And the second question, when it comes to users, I think, we've had the whole science of customer experience and user experience that is now gradually finding its way back, or they are screaming, let us in. But I'm not sure the engineering team are ready to open up, being completely frank, their doors to non-technical people. So I think we still have to be able to have hopefully people like you in the room and your mates and people who in your community to say it's a non-negotiable. The social scientists have to be at the table, and we have to listen to them and give them the respect they require. But we're still not there yet, and I felt it. I mean, because I work in ethics, I felt the frostiness every single time I walk in a room. People say, oh, it's so nice. Look, Maria, she's so smiley. Oh, no, you don't touch my project. Because there is probably on the back of my mind the fact that if you are bringing a different level of analysis, that might look bad for people developing, which it shouldn't be the case, because they are not social scientists. They shouldn't. And it's not their job to know what the user wants. But we need to be able to somehow create that space and then bring the experts.
Thank you so much. We take one more question.
Very quick question is that, may I ask who identify yourself as social scientist? Can you raise up your hand? Social scientist?
Oh.
No? Right, so Maria, so I have a question, right? So how to bring more social scientists to our community?
There are plenty of research centers at different universities. So I think it's just a matter of inviting them in, events like this or, workshops where you bring together, you invite them and you invite them to express their opinions. And you start by building some bridges. And from there, start creating some research themes. Because I felt like the best way to bring people together is around a common theme. And when you find it, it's much easier, because in abstraction, people will have their own reasons of why or why not will accept different opinions. But if you work together and we start with a mindset of openness and collaboration, I think it's much easier. So, come up with an idea of a workshop. Take the whatever. Some of the slides I've used. By the way, I will share them with you if you think they're useful. And then yes, invite people along. People will come. So the ethics community, AI ethics community, is very proactive, and I think they will love to be part of it. Especially because it's a new challenge for us, which it's waiting for us to dig in and solve it. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maria, for the talk. Thank you so much.